Hey everyone, and welcome back. If you remember in my last video, I did a flat versus ramped shooting board, and kind of my thoughts and opinions on what I wanted to do. When you first start, me anyways, when I first start thinking about a jig for the shop, I think of a utilitarian, and I think probably most people do. Think of it as a utilitarian type of thing and just kind of glue it and screw it together, get it done, get it over with so you can go ahead and start using the tool. Well, that's not how my mind works in reality. The thought process works that way until I start, the initial thought process, until I start building the project in my mind, right? So once I start building the project in my mind, I start obviously changing things here and there. And it usually ends up not only a more elaborate project than I originally imagined, but it usually ends up taking a little bit longer too. So let's get down to the brass tacks. This is my completed, almost completed anyway, shooting board. All right, so obviously you can see I went with flat, and I guess first I'll go over the wood that I used, why I used it, and maybe some dimensions. So the woods that I used, as you can tell, this is Purple Heart on the top, and for the keeper rail, that's also Purple Heart as far as well as the backstop rail. It doesn't look that big, but it's pretty massive. This piece right here is black walnut. And on the base, I went with, well, this is actually, I had a piece of what I thought was Europly, but I wasn't sure what it was, so I went ahead and went to the store and got a piece of Baltic birch, which is basically a cheaper version of Europly. It's still got 13 ply, and it's all birch, solid core birch, so can't go wrong there. And it was probably a quarter to a third of the price of Europly. The only bad thing is you have to buy the whole sheet. They don't just cut it up where I got it, mine anyway. They don't cut it up, for just what you need, right? And then this last piece right here is just a piece of beech that I had in my stock here in the shop. And so let's go for dimensions. I got a tape measure around here somewhere. Overall board width is 14 1/4. This first section here is it's like 11 3/16. This center section is 2 1/8, and the rail itself is just under an inch, so it comes in about 7/8 ish. Thickness wise, I used basically 3/4 and 3/4. Well, this is a little bit thicker than 3/4, but the Baltic birch is 3/4 inch stock. So it comes out to about 1 5/8 overall height here. Now this rail is lower than this rail, I would imagine, for obvious reasons, so it doesn't get caught up or anything like that. I wanted this main surface right here to be higher than everything else, so that's why I did that. Lengthwise, we're looking at just over 2 foot. And I went with Purple Heart because it was, frankly, when I went to the lumber store or the wood store, this was the only stuff that they had that was wide enough for what I was looking for. And I mean, everything else was like an inch shy of what I needed. And that's why I went with the Purple Heart. Plus, the Purple Heart is just, it's a pretty stable wood, and it's very hard, very, I don't know. I can't really think of a better way to describe it other than Purple Heart is one of the harder woods that I've ever had to deal with as a woodworker, especially for hand tool woodworking. It's a miserable wood to work with, but it's beautiful. So I like tools that I can enjoy looking at. I like to make tools that I'm going to want to use, not some just junky piece of crap. I would say made out of plywood, but this actually has plywood in it. The reason I went with the plywood, I'm not a huge fan. If you know me, you know I'm not a huge fan of plywood, but plywood in the right application, it has its place. It does. This is not a fine piece of furniture or anything like that. This is a shop jig, and for a shop jig, I need the measurements. I'm trying my best here lately, anyway, to not geek out and be precise, and being the perfectionist and things of that nature. But on projects like this, where if you're off square on anything, if your measurements are off, if you're not square being the ultimate goal here, if anything is off, everything that you shoot with this is going to be off. So it is critical. Some portions of this tool are critical. So the building went a little bit slower than I thought. Plus, I had to go out and get a different sheet of plywood. And, well, if you've ever worked with Purple Heart with hand tools, you know that it is a pain in the butt, especially doing ingrain. And I didn't have a shooting board yet, so it was challenging, to say the least. Some of the features, I haven't finished quite yet because I don't like this big blocky section here, so I'm probably going to do a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of detail work on here. I'll shape it out a little bit better to where it kind of drops off or something. I started doing a little bit of shaping here already. As long as I don't mess with this corner right here is critical in this particular application, for obvious reasons, I think. The beech, I used it for this cleat back here on the bottom, just because, well, beech is a good wood. It's easy to work with. It's super easy to work with compared to like Purple Heart. Beech is amazing, but beech is good. It'll be the perfect little wooden cleat, and it didn't cost me anything. That's the main ticket, right? I went with the walnut because I love walnut. It's my favorite wood in the whole world. I had this. It was readily available. It was almost to the size that I needed. Didn't take a whole lot of work, and, well, it just works super, super easy in my book with hand tools. So that's why I chose the woods that I did. Well, getting to the Europly, I wanted something that will, I'm going to put all the time and effort into getting things square and level and all that jazz. I want to make sure that it stays that way, right? So I wanted Europly because plywood in general is basically, taking a sheet, a piece of wood that's got its grain this way, and then putting it this way, and then this way, and then this way, until you get, your plywood sheet. And that gives it strength and stability. Stability being the key, right? So if I want this thing to not move at all while I'm working, or, you know, over the life of this tool, I want to use plywood as the base. But obviously I didn't want to use plywood as the actual surface that I'm working on, just because, I don't know, call me eccentric or whatever, but I like the Purple Arc. So if you don't, you know, whatever. It's not your tool. You can make it out of whatever you'd like. I did little, you know, I don't know if it's going to matter really, but I just kind of rounded off the edges. Kind of acts like a little, I don't know, a little ramp or whatever, but it softens the edges or the ends of the piece that my plane will ride on. And that, I haven't finished it yet. What I'm going to do, I'm going to put some wax on the rail. I have not used this yet either, so this is going to be my first run. I'm going to put some wax on the rail, and I'll do that here in a second before I do my first test run with you guys. But the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit it with some boiled linseed oil when I turn the camera off, and yeah, maybe I'll give it a cameo in one of the future videos, but I'm not going to do a video of me putting the BLO on the shooting board. You've seen that plenty of times, right? So my shooting plane, if you remember, I did an unboxing of this plane. So far I love it to death. I just sharpened up the blade, the iron, and she's all nice and true and ready to rock. The shooting board, minus a little bit of shaping details, has all been, I've taken off all the sharp corners, did all the finishing on it and everything, with the exception of a little bit of shaping I might want to do here, and then coat it with some BLO, wax it. So let's go ahead and give her Maiden Voyage. I'm going to bring her around to the other side so you can see it. Let's see if I can get this without killing my computer here. Alright, and the cleat is good because you can just, and as you see, I let it go over a little bit. I made it just long enough to where it kind of overhangs. Unfortunately, I didn't take into consideration, it really doesn't matter, because I'm not like I'm putting a whole lot of pressure on this or anything, plus it's really stout. But you can put it up into your vise, and now you have a good solid work surface that you can shoot from. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there as long as my test piece doesn't hit my lamp, so we're good. This is a piece of cherry, 3/4 inch stock, probably about, I don't know, 4.5 inches wide or so. Oh, 3 3/4, that was way off. But let's go ahead and wax this guy up. I'm just using some Johnson's paste wax, and I'll dip her in there, get a little on there, and wax this rail up so that, and the reason I'm waxing is just so that, I mean, that's already bringing out the color in the walnut. I really should have BLO'd it, but I think it'll be just fine. If I start applying BLO, it's going to start raising the grain and all that, and I don't want to mess with it too much. But this, the reason I'm putting on this wax is so that my plane, my shooting plane, I'm trying to get it all up into the grain there. But that way, my shooting plane has a really nice slick surface to ride against. I can already feel it. It's going to be nice. Now I'm also going to get these side rails. And I left a little bit of a gap in this runway right here between the main surface and this this rail over here. I left it there like that on purpose. I'm gonna go ahead and put this on here just to but I left a little gap there on purpose. Just because I didn't want anything to get caught up on in the corners there, right? And that way, if any chips or anything like that start coming off, then I have, it has somewhere to go in a sense, and it's not fouling up the corner and making my shooting inaccurate. Not that I think it would or anything like that, but I'm going to go ahead and apply some of this wax on the shooting plane as well. Just on the riding surface. Get a good coat on there. All right, and buff that up. Quick buff. All right, Maiden Voyage. See how she slides. There's almost no movement at all between the rail, but it's not squeezed in there so tight. I mean, that's nice, isn't it? Very happy, very, very happy. Yeah, so let's go ahead and give this guy a shot. Now I've got this cut set really shallow. Maybe I can bring you in a little bit closer. That's about the best I can do. So all I'm going to do is press it up. And it's not, I'm going to take a shaving, but the real test is to check squareness when I'm done. And I'm barely putting any pressure on it at all. Wow. I almost have to watch it so it doesn't slide off. But you can, without making this board 3 feet long, I can't really put a stop on it. I'll set it a little bit deeper. And if you're new to shooting boards, the reason I'm doing this the way that, or the reason I made this was, for one, I didn't have one, but this rail right here stops the wood from breaking out. That's number one. But the main reason is, as long as this surface is square to this, well, square to this rail, and you know that this surface and this surface are parallel enough to where you put a square between the board and your plane, and that's square, then you have a square this way, right? Well, actually, you have square this way. Whatever surface of the project you put onto the main body of the shooting board, it is going to be square to the plane. As long as you're shooting correctly, right? The other part is that you're going to be, as long as this is square to the surface you're gliding your plane along, it too will be square this way. So that's the reason for the shooting board. And I made this block this tall because that's the max height that I can shoot with this shooting plane at the settings of this particular shooting board. There's a little bit of resistance, but that's just the wood. Me getting used to shooting again. But as you can see, it's obviously doing its job. It's leaving a pretty decent finish. No breakout. So here's the real test. Sure we're good. See if we're square. Here we go. So this is the way I had it. So this should be square. And it is perfectly square. And then the bottom up should be also square. And it is. So it's a success. Success. Again, the reason I did this, and this might actually work, the reason that I went flat, if you remember, is vice or ramped, is so that I could do rails, right? For like a picture frame or whatever. So this piece, yeah, it just might work. So we'll set that. It's kind of cutting it close, but as you can see, I'm now being able to join the edge. Now this will be guaranteed to that surface as well, basically making it parallel with this. Because the first thing, you have to get one side established, then you're pressing that up against this stop block here, then you're shooting the end grain, and then you're pressing the end grain up against that stop block. And you got to make sure that it is, you know, obviously that it's pressed up and it's good. So it's probably be a good idea to wax up that block as well, at least the front part. And then you shoot it. And that's like almost no effort. And you can see it's just beautiful. Isn't that awesome? I'm so stoked with this. It's really, really come together for me. So, yeah, final thoughts. Hey, it's a tool and it works. It's a good working tool. But it's also a beautiful working tool. Not only the plane itself, but the shooting board. I gotta say, because I don't like working with Purple Heart. But outside of that, it was a pretty pleasant process to get this done. I may end up changing this out, the stop block, and I may end up putting a sacrificial face. So I'll lose whatever, I don't know. I mean, the piece wouldn't have to be, but regular 3/4 inch stock. And then you just drill 2 holes through it, put some hardware in there so that you can tighten it down, and that way you have a fence that will move. And that way, if you start cutting it away, because I've already shot this, so if you can, well, you probably can't see, but there's a little tiny step in here, right? So every time I go any deeper than that, I'm going to actually be cutting this rail in right here also. That just comes with it. So you just make everything square, like as if there's no cutter in there. And then once you start running this the entire length of this rail right here, it will cut it for you. It'll cut that little rabbit in there for you. And then once it's shot, it's done. Unless you go with the deeper cut. But I'll probably end up setting this for one. The only time I would ever put a different setting on the shooting plane is if I had a really difficult, hard, like Purple Heart or something like that I was shooting, and I wanted to make sure that I was taking a lighter, finer shaving or something. If I wanted to take a big fat shaving on something, something of that nature. But I have to keep in mind that the heavier the cut that I take, the more I'm going to be taking off of not only this inside rail, but I'll also be taking it off of here, right? So this is going to be inset just a hair from this end right here, but that's really no it doesn't matter, because you're removing that portion of wood off of the piece that you're shooting. So all right. Hopefully this video did some good. If you're just hanging out, well, thanks for joining me. Again, it was pretty fun, challenging project, but we got her done. And it's time to move on now. After I get this finished, put the finish on, it'll be time to move on to the next project. I'm getting ready to go out of town for a little bit, so I won't have any videos coming out for the next couple, well, we'll just say until I put it out another video. But there will be more stuff coming. Obviously, the fun never stops around here, so when I get time to get in the shop, I'll start doing some filming. Hopefully it will, work on something that that's a little bit different eventually, anyway. Oh, and Cyril, if you were talking about, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to leave the comment down below. But as regarding like a 45 jig or something like that, I'll just probably, plane out a triangular piece that will fit flush, that I can also, and then I'll just basically, mate those two pieces of wood together and glide those both against the rail to shoot to keep it simple, I guess. I'm not going to make any permanent fixture or like the Tico Boat, I think is his name. I'm not going to go fancy like that in design anyways. I'll just keep it simple. The last thing, I didn't, if you notice, there's no hardware on here at all. None. There's not a screw, nothing. And that's because I didn't want anything to ever back out and mess with any of the tools, right? Any of the plane or the wood that I'm planing or anything of that nature. So I didn't use any hardware. It's just straight glue. I glued it down. I made sure that all of the surfaces were square. Everything is perfectly square. All the way I checked the entire board. So no matter how long of a piece you're doing, you're able to make sure that everything is perfectly square. And then obviously you're making sure that's square. And then the last piece of the puzzle is when you go to glue down this piece here. Get it clamped up, get it glued and clamped where you want it. And then move this in. And then tap it into place once the clamps, once you get the clamps all the way down, make sure you keep checking it or it'll float out on you. And I just kept checking it and nudging it along until it was absolutely perfect, and it's perfect right where it's at right now. Yeah, it doesn't get any better than that. So I'm perfectly square everywhere, and I'm very pleased with how this turned out. So, all right, that's enough of me jibber jabber. Friends and family, I love you. Everyone else, I'll see you on the next video. If you have any questions or current comments or anything, feel free to leave them below, and I'll see you everybody on the next video.